Linguistics. The nature of language. Para 1. The complexity and multidimensionality of language has always posed a problem of propounding any exact and comprehensive definition of it. That is why scholars have defined language variously, following, of course, their respective bias about it. Thus every definition is partial yet contributes significantly toward our comprehension of this phenomenon. And language can be regarded as any or all of these things contained in various definitions offered by language scholars from time to time. No one way of looking at it is uniquely right, nor any other is completely irrelevant. Taken as a whole, language is a many-sided phenomenon. Its nature, therefore, can best be described by looking at it from all relevant perspectives such as organic, social, psychological, and structural, which are described separately as under. Para 2. Organic view. According to this view, language is perceived as a kind of living organism. It is very much like a living creature. Language scholars generally talk of its growth, birth, decline, and developments. In historical linguistics, it is maintained that different languages of the world have developed out of what was initially one language, and these different languages have split up into a series of dialects. Following this analogy, we can set up a correspondence between the language of an individual and the individual plant. It is also maintained in zoology that only the isolated individual possesses real existence and the species are nothing more than conceptual groupings and distinctions made by the human mind. We can adopt a similar standpoint with regard to differences in dialects and languages. And these dialects and languages have their own historical development and are in a state of continued change. Another aspect in which we could draw a parallel is the following. The development of an individual animal organism is dependent on two factors. On the one hand, it is conditioned by the characteristics of its parents who through the process of inheritance start it off developing in a particular direction. On the other hand, are all the chance influences of climate, nutrition, and environmental pressures to which an individual is subject throughout his life. The substantial similarity to its parents is established by the first influence and the differences by the other. In the same way, an idiolect is formed under the influence of the speech of members of the social group on the one hand, which we can regard as the equivalent of the parents, and on the other, by the quite unrelated and unique experiences of his mental and physical life. It is generally agreed that the first is by far the most powerful determinant. Firstly, because any change in the character of the individual which causes it to deviate from the direction which it first acquired, will be handed on the following generation. This leads to a more marked differentiation among types. This is equally true in the history of language. Para 3. Social view. According to this view, language is the creation of man himself. Man, being essentially a social animal, wanted to communicate with his fellow beings through some medium. Thus language emerged through a social need. But the initial form of language must have been different from the one we see today. The prehistoric language was mostly in the forms of gestures, movements, instinctive cries, imitation of natural sound, etc. It was quite later that language acquired its structural complexity. This process is obviously spread over millions of years in human civilization. But this is a truism that language is essentially a social activity. It is rooted in the society and reflects the social norms, values, and the cultural aspects of a community quite comprehensively. Para 4. Psychological view. According to this view, human beings have been endowed by nature to speak. They are genetically programmed to be able to speak at a particular time in their life. It is essentially the human mind which is responsible for the processing of language in an individual. There are broadly two schools of thought on this issue. Behaviorists consider language as a kind of behaviors, the same as other human behaviors. Language, in their view, is not handled by soul or psyche. It comes out as a cumulative reaction of the human body. The mentalists, on the other hand, maintain that speech is an innate capability although it is developed in a speech community. Human beings are born with this capability, the animals are deprived of it. Thus the psychological view associates language with human brain as much as with speech homounity. Para 5. Structural view. This view maintains that language should be judged and analyzed on its own right. The structuralists believe that language has a system and this system is based on a number of structures. Language is thus basically a system of communication operating on a number of systems with specific structure. By structure is meant the pattern, and these patterns recur and have achieved a kind regularity. In any language of the world, there are various systems and structures working in close cooperation with each other. These systems and structures are known as phonological, syntactic, semantic, stylistic, pragmatic and graphic. The 20th century linguists are mainly structuralists in their approach. They look at language as made up of a number of systems and structures. Para 6. The above discussion quite clearly suggests that language is something highly complex. That is why it has been perplexing for the linguists to account for it in precise and comprehensive terms. It is, therefore, natural to have divergent views about language. And all these views are quite relevant to our better understanding of this phenomenon.